Institute for Security Studies, ISS. The third speaker is Dr. Semir Yusuf. He is senior researcher in the Horn of Africa program of the ISS. His research focuses on peace and conflict, transition politics, and Ethiopian studies. Semir has a PhD from the University of Toronto.
Okay, yes. Thank you. So thank you, Sion, for posing that very important question as well. Implications of COVID for political stability in Ethiopia, which I'll be focusing on actually. So let me start by saying COVID-19 and preventative measures taken by the government will have profound implications for political stability depending on the spread and duration of the virus. But in general, we can say that the pandemic could have two apparently contradictory outcomes in terms of political stability. One is the calming of political tensions, but then the other one is the escalation of those political tensions again. So the immediate impact of COVID-19 was the calming of the political environment in this country. As we all know, the last 2 years in Ethiopia have witnessed a significant level of political liberalization, but at the same time, it has also witnessed sporadic violent conflicts in different parts of the country. Many of these conflicts could be attributed to certain key factors, which are common to most cases of conflicts. One is security concern among different political forces, ethnic groups, leading to group antagonism. The second one is this, nationalist logic, heightened level of emphasis on group worth, group value, again leading to intergroup antagonism, leading at times to conflict. And then we have elite opportunism as well, whereby elites engage in conflict mongering by way of achieving some political or economic gains out of it. Now, the advent of COVID-19 in Ethiopia has transformed, at least for a short period of time, the nature of some of these factors. For instance, as a result of COVID-19, there was a shift from concern for security from enemies to concern for saving lives from the virus. There was also a shift from emphasis on group worth, group value, to emphasis on group existence. And then there was also an element of shift in the way political elites tried to gain legitimacy from below. Instead of pursuing confrontational politics to gain legitimacy from their people, elites were pressed to advance the cause of COVID prevention. So a combination of these transformations led to the calming, a short-lived calming of the political environment in the country. So this didn't bring about a fundamental shift in the nature of our politics. It didn't, for example, bring about a fundamental change in perceptions towards old enemies, as much as it refocused priorities among some groups and elites. So that was the first immediate effect of COVID, calming of political tensions. But then as time goes by, COVID could aggravate different types of conflict. We can at least focus on two types here. One is disorganized, disorganized non-political riots. This could come about as consequences of the economic outcomes, the economic impacts of COVID and preventative measures. COVID and measures used to tackle it could aggravate poverty, income inequality, and they could also trigger a general sense of frustration among the people. Depending on the duration and spread of the virus, government measures could be more stringent, and such more stringent measures could tamper with the effective movement of commercial and humanitarian goods, which could lead to increased food insecurity due to shortages of food items and price increases. So a combination of these factors could trigger riots and increased criminal activities. That's one thing. But then a more important factor, possibly sparking instability, is the resurfacing of political tensions in the country. Adam before me has quite nicely summarized the whole debate around governing Ethiopia after September. That would be the end of the term for the parliament and the government. So the government is now opting for constitutional interpretation, whereas some key political figures, political parties are advocating a more political solution to the dilemma. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves here is, will political tensions translate into unrest or violence on the ground? That depends on at least three factors. One is the capacity of the state to manage conflict. The second is the capacity of the opposition to stir and coordinate protest movements. And three is the willingness among all these forces to work together to fight a common enemy we call COVID-19. One interesting outcome, in my view, of the pandemic could be the emergence of an institutionally stronger but ideologically incoherent state in Ethiopia. The state will come out stronger institutionally under the state of emergency. The state could find opportunities to resolve some of its internal deficiencies that it was suffering from for the last 2 years since the coming to power of the current administration. It could reclaim its hijacked structures in different parts of the country. It could mend broken chains of command and control within its security apparatus. And therefore, this could lead to a more formidable state, institutionally speaking. But on the other hand, the ruling party could also lose opportunities to resolve its internal ideological incoherence. The Prosperity Party, the ruling party in Ethiopia today, was organizing massive training and indoctrination sessions on ideological and programmatic issues when COVID-19 hit Ethiopia. We all know that the EPRDF for the last 2 years was pretty much internally fractured and was going through a very difficult time because of ideological and political and other differences within its constituent parts. The Prosperity Party was trying to mend those problems, those instances and manifestations of internal incoherence when this pandemic hit the region. So it will not have the same kind of opportunities now to continue holding those indoctrination and training sessions meant to build a more internally coherent party structure, ideologically, programmatically speaking. And therefore, we can say that the institutional power of the state could grow stronger, but the ideological coherence of the party will remain in limbo. The question we need to ask ourselves here then is, if opposition movement is galvanized in Ethiopia, will the state be able to control and manage it? As we have seen, it has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. The second factor we need to consider here is the capacity of opposition parties. The galvanization of opposition in Ethiopia is partly dependent on the capacity of opposition parties. One other outcome of this pandemic would be the weakening of the institutional capacity of many opposition parties in Ethiopia. And this could happen in three ways. One is their relationship with their constituencies could be affected negatively because of the pandemic and state of emergency in place. Two, institutional works and attempts at rebranding themselves organizationally could also be affected negatively. And ideological and programmatic works could also be pretty much hampered as a result of preventative measures put in place by the government. So this is very important because opposition parties in Ethiopia entered or re-entered into the political scene in 2018 with key deficiencies, institutionally, ideologically, programmatically as well. And they were in the process of rebranding themselves when the pandemic hit us. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves a second question here. If opposition parties are able to stir and mobilize opposition movement in the country, can they as well be able to manage and coordinate a more orderly opposition movement against the state? So mobilizing people towards protest movements is one thing, but making that quite orderly, organized and coordinated is something else. So that is another point to keep in mind. The third, perhaps the best case scenario here is not about the capacity, but the willingness of all these forces to work together to fight the common enemy we have. So the particular question we have here is, will the state and opposition parties be willing enough to iron out a deal that can help them unite in the face of the coronavirus threat? So we can conclude by saying that the coronavirus pandemic had the immediate effect of calming the political environment in Ethiopia, but then with the passage of time, it could trigger, and it is actually triggering, political wrangling, political tensions. But whether those political tensions descend into unrest and violence depends on the capacity and willingness of political forces to aggravate or manage conflict. So by way of reversing the potential road towards instability, I would like to emphasize one thing among many others. All political forces, the ruling party, opposition parties, need to consider one very important point, and that is the issue of governing Ethiopia after September should take into consideration three very important elements. The mode of governance after September, in my view, should be quite effective. It should be an outcome of political negotiations, and it should also be constitutionally mandated. It should be effective because we don't know when this pandemic will go away, and therefore we need effective governance strategy. But then that mode of governance should be an outcome of active political negotiation in order to earn political legitimacy, leading to political stability. But it should not be just an outcome of political negotiation. It should also be constitutionally mandated, because we need some level of continuity in the rules governing politics in this country. And therefore, I would like to suggest to the ruling party, on the one hand, that it should seriously consider the importance of political negotiations in addition to constitutional interpretation, because constitutional interpretations cannot alone resolve this problem at hand. Ethiopia hasn't yet managed to build strong, independent, and professional democratic institutions. The nominally democratic institutions that we have had have been co-opted in the past by the political establishment to pursue political goals. We can't all of a sudden use those institutions now to get professional rulings and expect all political forces to submit to those rulings. And therefore, we need political negotiations in addition to constitutional solutions. But on the other hand, opposition parties should also acknowledge the importance of invoking the Constitution, the provisions in the Constitution, by way of arriving at some level of solution, some kind of solution in this country, mainly because we need continuity in the rules governing this country, in our constitutional framework as well. And therefore, I would like to emphasize that political negotiations and taking the constitution seriously should not be seen as mutually exclusive. They should come on board together. We should find ways and means of merging those two solutions together in order to arrive at a politically legitimate and constitutionally acceptable form of Turkey. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Semir.